long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, the special edition.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 29. I think I just had my mind blown pre-show. I am your host, Robert Zachary, along with my hilarious co-host, John Llewellyn. Hello, John.
Hello.
Are you serious?
I don't know that I'm hilarious, but I definitely.
Serious? Are you serious?
Yeah.
That's a thing.
So for our listeners, I just dropped the Leonardo DiCaprio news on our host here, literally seconds before he introduced the show.
He gets assaulted by a bear?
I don't think he does, but that is the rumor.
Oh God!
That's like, I don't even know if it's a rumor or if it's just like hearsay that some blog put on the internet. And that is, I mean, if it's not, it's better if they never release the movie now, I think, and it's just left to everyone's imagination.
Yeah, did you hear when that movie's coming out?
No.
It's coming out on December 18th.
Oh no. Yeah, no one's gonna see it.
So if you're just joining us for the first time, and I thought I should do this because I haven't done this in a while, what you're listening
and
to?
If you're joining us for the first time, you picked a fantastic time.
Fantastic! This is one for the vaults. We Talking Bird, 2013, like November 2013, I think, something like that.
Yeah.
So like over 2 years ago, we started a like last minute thing. Like, hey, let's talk about the third season of the Adult Swim show Eagleheart, starring Chris Elliott.
Yeah.
Go check it out. It's all on Hulu.
Yeah. Seasons 1 and 2 had aired.
Yes.
And had been out for a while.
Yes.
And we're going to do a third season, and Robert and I are friends.
We just found that out recently.
Yeah. I just found I had always assumed that was the case, but I learned that was new information for Robert. I think we both learned something today.
We did.
So anyway, Robert and I were friends, and he posed a question to a number of our mutual friends. He said, "Hey, is anyone interested in doing a Eagleheart podcast with me?" And I had just finished rewatching the first two seasons of the show, and I love the show. It was really great. And I just thought, yeah, I'll talk about Eagleheart. I'd love to talk about Eagleheart. So I joined Robert, and so I'll let you pick it back up then.
So we did that, and then John has a busy scholastic life and life in general.
Yeah.
And
I read a lot of Scholastic magazines.
I couldn't sell him on a on continuing the podcast in a different form because we kind of ran out of shows. We could have gone back and done the first
once Eagleheart season 3 ended, it was sort of even left up in the air whether that show would ever come back, and it has not come back so far.
Yes, and so and in my history of coming up with ideas on the fly, it's like maybe someday. Now we're saying this publicly, so I'm going to be a total Joel Hodgson about this. Maybe if people were interested in the future, we could go back and do those first seasons as a separate show, but for pay. Yeah, we'd have to get money for it. Now I know that's some pretty big brass balls I've just put out
that's
there.
It's very
some pretty
controversial
big balls.
Stance in the world of podcasting.
But it's like $1 an episode or something. That's an idea, isn't it? Maybe I should cut that part out, so we don't have to be. But that's
no, you don't have to cut it out. Just make sure no one steals or.
Yeah, it's like I was gonna say, if you ever want to hear the original Bird Boys, go back and do the first 2 seasons.
What we're gonna do?
Don't start a Kickstarter.
I'm gonna personally download a copy of this episode, put it in an envelope, mail it to myself, and never open it.
Absolutely.
So we have copyrighted that idea.
Exactly.
And that I think marks the third time I have made that joke or reference.
That would be your catchphrase. That would be your catchphrase.
Yeah, that's my catchphrase.
So I guess the long of this short story is, God, I'm like, my thermalite slippers now my feet are hot. I feel like I'm quite agitated and energetic today. That's
as good a lesson, as good a takeaway from this story as any.
I'm taking my socks off. It's one of those kind of shows. We turned into a Star Wars podcast because, of course, the line of creativity goes Eagleheart, Gap, Life, and then Star Wars. And so we've kind of walked ourselves into this situation now. I'm literally looking at the ticker. We are 16 days, 10 hours, 16 minutes, and 0 seconds from The Force Awakens. But we're in this kind of weird spot here because we've been talking about this for 28 episodes, this being the 29th, if I didn't say that already. Mm-hmm. And we're kind of in this weird gray area where we don't want to be spoiled anymore about Star Wars. We've talked about Star Wars for hours and hours and hours and hours. And I don't feel talked out so much as I'm cautious about how much information I want to put into my brain. So now we have to vet it for each other before we even start. Are you all right hearing about this? Are you okay hearing about that?
Yeah.
But so if you want real information, we're probably not we're not your Huckleberry, but if you want conversation and interpretation, that took a long.
We are not your source for breaking Star Wars news, but we are your source for fun and relaxed conversation and occasional bits.
All right.
Occasional. So, given that it's 16 plus days, let's check in a little bit. Robert, how are you feeling about it being 16 plus days to the movie? How are you feeling about the movie?
It's kind of a weird thing. It's kind of, I'm excited and I'm nervous. And there's also a part of me that realizes that I'm a grown adult and I can choose to feel however I want about it.
Yeah.
I can be like, oh, whatever. I told somebody, I think it was my mother, that I was like, I've almost kind of convinced myself it's probably going to suck.
Yeah.
Because I kind of have to make any other outcome I can deal with at the time. But the fact that that it would be terrible, that it would somehow, this movie is going to miss the point. Like, it's like, it runs like almost, I don't even know if this is a proper analogy, but it's like it smells like a Star Wars movie. It looks like a Star Wars movie, but it's not a Star Wars movie. And that's my biggest concern, is that, it's going to have all these weird things that I don't like, kind of a winking to the audience stuff, our favorite characters saying every one of their catchphrases throughout the movie and just having the audience go, I mean, I could go on for hours about all the ways they could mess it up. I've told on this show many times that about when they made I think it was around the time they made the announcement, I had a nightmare about what the Disney Star Wars would look like. And it was something akin to the Fantastic Voyage, where they literally shrunk the Millennium Falcon and it went inside somebody. And it was like fighting white corpuscles or whatever. It's like, I know it's not going to be any of that. I know that Harrison Ford has seen it and he says it's wonderful. And I trust Harrison Ford implicitly. No, I don't.
Yeah. Sure.
I'm sure he's like, I know his philosophy only because when that whole dust up came up with when Shia LaBeouf had his first kind of his own personal odyssey of being a resident Hollywood crazy person started. It kind of started, at least the way I viewed it, his comments about the Crystal Skull and how he'd felt that he'd really let fans down, and he got a lot of praise and a lot of guff from Hollywood about kind of pulling back the curtain about how these things work, and Harrison Ford actually was one of the first voices of kind of annoyance with Shia about sometimes you just there's a time for everything, and sometimes you just have to back the product. Was kind of his thing, and that you shouldn't have put it. And
right. He views that sort of as part of his job of being an actor in a movie is then to promote the movie,
right?
But he's not necessarily going to go over the top in his praise if he doesn't think it wants it. He'll back the movie, but he's not going to.
So you think
he's not going to kill himself for it?
So you think that his indications, his like effusive praise for this film is actually genuine?
I don't even know. Well, I wouldn't even, for Harrison Ford in his case, I wouldn't even take his effusive praise as evidence. I would take the fact that he is actually making all of these appearances, and that he's even like willing to talk about it, and that he seems sort of more comfortable talking about his role as Han Solo and how it, its place in his career and everything. And I think if maybe his experience on this film and his attitude towards the movie wasn't as positive, was less positive, that he would still back the movie, but he's not gonna, he wouldn't necessarily be as willing to put himself out there and talk as openly about it. That's a guess, though.
Yeah, I mean, I understand. I think I guess that makes sense. It's
because I don't know what kind of promotion he did for like Ender's Game.
I don't think he did. I think he did that thing where they sit in the chair.
Yeah,
and then
he did the electronic press kit. He maybe showed up on Conan once.
Yes.
And even then, they probably spent more time talking about other things than about Ender's Game. Now Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg just came out and said that he's seen it 3 times and that it might be the greatest movie ever made.
Oh, jeez. And he would be the one to know.
He would know, right?
Speaking of French,
who but the maker of War Horse would be a better judge of?
Did he have that? Did he do that?
Film quality. Was
he tenting his index fingers and thumb, making a little steeple when he was talking about it? Because that's my favorite Spielberg move, when he gets into that kind of like, it's almost like he's praying to himself about like, he gets his little tented fingers. He's usually wearing a hat that has the name of a battleship on it.
Right.
And he's got a nice, sensible sweater, and he's tenting his fingers. I was like, I think it's the best
he's
movie
in a tux. He's either in a sweater or a tux.
Do him and George not speak anymore? That's
the thing I was just thinking of, is that Spielberg is kind of in an odd position here, because he's certainly friendly with Kathleen Kennedy. He is probably friendly, but also sees himself as somewhat of a mentor for J.J. Abrams.
Yes.
He has some kind of stake in this movie doing well and this movie working. This movie, the effects and everything else of this movie working, because then a lot of that work that ILM does then filters to him and what's available to him and what he can do in his movies, depending on what he's making. If not the movies that he's directing, at least those that he produces. And, he worked with Lawrence Kasdan. He knows a lot of people and is friendly with a lot of people who are attached to this movie. At the same time, he is, George Lucas is, I'm guessing, one of his best friends. I have no idea if Spielberg would consider Lucas one of his best friends. Lucas, I'm almost certain, would consider Spielberg one of his best friends. in the industry anyway.
Awkward.
Right. So, and you have Lucas out here doing exactly what we suggested last week. You know, we said, wow, he's kind of talking about this like a divorce. And then he comes out this week and says, like, yeah, it's kind of like a divorce. Or, you know, it's kind of like when your kids grow up and move away. And, you know, then you come back and with your new wife, but your ex-wife's also there. And, you know, it's so he has Lucas on the other side of him talking like that. And you know, so, you know, for Spielberg to say, like, oh, this might be the greatest movie ever made. Well, what does that say about the movies that Lucas made by himself?
Right.
You know? And, you know, not even the prequels, but, you know, the Empire Strikes Back or, you know.
Or even American Graffiti, you know. It's like, yeah,
right.
It's kind of, well, I mean, the only difference is that, you know, Spielberg is still an active filmmaker. And I honestly, you know, regardless of what George Lucas says, he's essentially retired.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because his whole like small experimental films, that's just his that's just like a 70-year-old multi-billionaire's version of when somebody comes home and they go, so did you look for a job today? Oh yeah, I made I'm going to make small experimental.
Yeah, I worked on my resume.
I made some calls.
Yeah. I mean, Lucas is, at least in the moment, certainly focused on his new museum. You know, the Lucas Museum.
Which even he, in that article, you know, and I think we're referring partly to this Washington Post profile.
So Lucas is getting Kennedy Center honor this year, and every year the Washington Post profiles all of the Kennedy Center honor recipients, and so there's a profile of Lucas.
And even he kind of acted like a little annoyed or miffed about some of the I don't know exactly what the impediments have been for him getting this museum put together. Mm-hmm. Just that I think he's been getting some pushback from Chicago.
He got some pushback from Chicago politicians, local groups who there was some combination of they didn't want the museum in certain locations around the city. They didn't want the museum to look certain, you know, however the original design was going to look. You know, maybe they didn't want it in Chicago at all, you know, all that kind of stuff.
And you could tell he's getting a little miffed about it, and just he actually brought up the concept of whether even people understand what museums are for and that they're a place of learning and I honestly don't know what George is expecting to teach people with this museum. I mean, he is definitely a guy who had his fingers in a lot of technological pies in the last 35, 40 years. But, you know, I guess maybe this is his version of a presidential library.
Yeah, essentially.
I think this is, you know, this is the thing that'll exist post his, you know, when he shuffles off this mortal coil, so to speak. I mean, I'm still kind of, I find it sad that he took it to Chicago, a city that his connections to are tentative and tenuous at best because of marriage and convenience of his being able to oversee it when, you know, there is something about him.
Right. He's very much a California guy.
Yeah, he's a Bay Area.
And the fact that he couldn't get it to work in California, you know, it's a little disappointing.
So there was one thing about when they asked him about him seeing the movie that he said, oh, I'll probably just watch it on the ranch because I have the best movie theater in the world. So he still owns that ranch. Oh, yeah.
I mean, I assume he owns the property. I don't know. Yeah, that's a good question then.
What do they do there then?
If ILM is still based there?
No, ILM is still is at the Presidio in San Francisco, right, and has been for many years. But it makes me wonder, you know, he was in that process of trying to build, I think this actually might have been completed. He had actually kind of done all this work that he could have done whole movies on that ranch. And that's when they kind of said, well, that's great, George, but, you know, you're not making any more movies. You don't have a Star Wars movie in the pipe. You don't have any projects that, you know, and I think that's when it kind of put the impetus behind him getting rid of Star Wars or whatever, of being like, well, you know, it's Star Wars is going to start generating negative income at a certain point because you have to pay to have this ranch with all the technological stuff that you have to update every year.
Yeah, and I'm curious now, he sold Skywalker Sound and ILM and all those properties to Disney, but I don't know that he sold the actual property to Disney.
Right.
And it's possible that, he's now charging Disney rent to use Skywalker Ranch to house ILM. I haven't seen any reporting on this, and nor would I expect it, because that industry reporting, like, that's not what they do. They don't dig into those kind of business dealings as much. They just say, oh, they sold ILM. Of course, ILM is, the big headline for that. And they're going to sort of take that and move on. But yeah, I would be curious to know, how much of that property still belongs to Lucas, and, is ILM and is Disney owned ILM and Skywalker Sound, are they now tenants on Lucas's property? And it's possible, as you said, he has these new family connections to Chicago, so it's possible that he's not on the ranch all that much.
I've kind of heard that he's a full-time Chicago guy. I mean,
yeah. But for this movie, I would much rather spend my Decembers in Marin County than I would in Chicago. And so he's probably thinking, like, well, if I still own this property, or, what are they going to do? Call the cops on me? He'll show up, and, if people want to watch, he'll probably watch it by himself or with his family, just go into the theater there and just watch it there. But yeah, I don't know if that land is still his or if that's Disney's now.
Yeah, well, that being just a quick aside, George, if you're listening, you want two people to come watch the movie with you. Mm-hmm. I'll fly myself out. Yeah. I'll even fly John out. The three of us, we'll do a podcast afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Yeah, it's I guess the idea of licensing comes in, and then maybe he owns it, or they have an option to buy it at some point in the future. I mean, it kind of makes me wonder, like, we're getting a little too into this, but he had a long-standing thing with his neighbors in Marin County about expansion in that area, and he wanted to expand that. Maybe that's what I'm getting from he wanted to create a full state-of-the-art studio, and he wasn't able to because he could never get his neighbors to sign off on these easements or whatever. And then he actually turned around as kind of what a lot of people have characterized as an FU to his neighbors, as he decided to donate the land, and he's developing moderately to low income housing, the kind of thing. I don't know how much. I mean, that's a lot of speculation on the article I read about, that he did that as a kind of a thumbing his nose at something, or rather it was just like that made good business sense. But
yeah,
I mean, that profile was really interesting. Is that the one, and that's the way I read things now. It's kind of like you read an article and you think you're reading the profile, and then you realize, no, you're reading the too long didn't read it version, and then you got to click through. Is that the same one where he admitted he hasn't really been online since 2000?
Oh, it might be.
That's 15 years of not being online. I would... Maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I would have said that's just insane. Now I'm kind of envious. It's kind of like that's a whole aspect of the world that he never has to. So basically, he's taking a lot of that anger that he had about how people receive the Phantom Menace is like, is that 15-year-old anger that he's still holding on to?
Oh, I think so. And reading that, it made a lot of sense for how he said recently, like, oh, people will just complain no matter what you do, or they'll tell you it's terrible no matter what you do, so why listen to them? Or it's like, if he's online recently, like, there are so many people, and especially just in the last couple of years on Twitter, this group of fans and film critics and every bloggers and podcasters and everyone in between talking about how much they love Star Wars generally, but also, you know, trying to kind of reclaim the prequels as, you know, worthy of being a Star Wars movie, or, you know, there was that debate for a long time about, like, okay, you know, people who hate the prequels and people who love the prequels, and now I think everyone has come to the point where they just accept, like, yeah, those are Star Wars movies. But, you know, even beyond that, I think, you know, if he was online more recently, he would see just how many people, like, love those movies, or even if they don't love them, they try to understand what he was doing with them and try to, you know, find those good bits in there. And so, you know, you hear him say all the time, like, oh, people just didn't understand what I was doing. They didn't get it. Well, I think he would see maybe that was true at the time, but over the years, people have tried to get it and tried to understand what he was doing. And so, yeah, for him to say that he hasn't really been online in over a decade, I think makes a lot of that it makes his reactions and the way he talks about the Star Wars movies and the Star Wars franchise now, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, it's almost like sometime in 2000, he just, like, you know, he took the AOL icon off his desktop and dumped it, and just like, well, I'm done with that. And he's formed his whole opinion off of,
I will never visit alt.starwars.
Yeah, you know. Exactly. And it's kind of funny because you're right. It's kind of like the tide has changed. You know, it used to be, you know, it's such a knee-jerk reaction to, you know, make fun of the prequels, and it's pretty easy because, like, there are problems with those movies, and I'm not going to sit there and go, you guys are all wrong. But we've all, you know, inundated, even especially with the media, well, you know, podcasting and videos. There's, like, you know, there was the red letter media takedowns where they were like these 2-hour takedowns of the prequels one by one, and I never have sat down and watched them just because it's like, yeah, I understand, and I can't argue with them. And then there was the Phantom editor who, you know, one of the best things I've ever done that kind of outside the core Star Wars media is this guy, the Phantom editor, who has a name that I forget his name. He has a name that sounds just like another famous person, and that's what I can't remember. But he did an edit of Attack of the Clones, which actually had simple rotoscoping and stuff. And I never really sat down and watched his version of it so much as I watched it with his commentary, and he explained it. And it's like totally, you know, it's dead on, but we also have, after all this, you know, years and years of, like, prequels and fan edits and stuff, I never go, it's not like a situation where it's like the, you know, the first Harry Potter movie, which is like the most boring movie on the face of the planet for me. I can never watch that movie, even on, like, you know, an after Thanksgiving, let's throw on something, you know, simple and unassuming. I can never separate that movie from the Wizard People, Dear Reader commentary. Have you ever heard this?
No.
So there's a guy that he's a comedian, and I think he's actually from Austin, and he did a thing, and this is a long time ago, where he did a commentary on the first Harry Potter movie in a kind of in a funny voice, and he renames the characters and recontextualizes the entire movie, and it's hilarious. It's Brad Neely. Yes.
The guy who does China, Illinois, and Baby Cakes.
Oh, I honestly didn't know that he'd went on to other things. Because that's kind of my thing. I can never extricate that. Every time I look at the first Harry Potter movie, I always think it was like, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, a book on tape. I mean, I just can't separate it. Whereas, as the time goes on, and I've watched every fan edit of every, you know, the Dawn of the Empire, the Fall of the Empire, the Rise of the Jedi, you know, and you go on to, like, myspleen.net or whatever, the kind of like the best place to find these. And, you know, there's hundreds of fan edits and tweaks and, you know, which are different than the unspecialized editions, of which are people trying to use the best elements possible to recreate the original 1977, 80, and 83 cinematic experience. I mean, that's a whole different kind of philosophy. That's merely trying to satisfy a need of, like, not being able to get the original cuts of the movie in a high quality manner. But these are people that literally, like, would I removed 79% of the Jar Jar from this, but because there's always scenes that they couldn't. As time goes on, it's like those go away, and you come back to what existed, and it's kind of like, yeah, I'll put them on, and sometimes I just they're real groaners, but that's the movie he wanted to make, and I guess in all the excitement and even in my joking about the nervousness about 16 days or whatever, there is that part of me, and maybe I'm just repeating what we had said last week. There's a part of me that is sad that this man is still alive and he created this, and he doesn't have anything to do with it. I kind of almost wish that it's like, why don't they just make 2 movies? Or, you know what I mean? It's like, I know I could never do that. And
let him make one of the anthology movies or something.
It's oh God, could you imagine if he could come back and, like, maybe put a bow on his thing and say, I'm just going to do it. Yeah, my smaller, more experimental, independent film is the Boba Fett movie or something. But there's a certain kind of sadness. It does, because it's for the first time. It really is. We don't know. Even though they're telling us, oh, it's the best thing I've ever seen. It's like, it's so delightful. But at the end of the thing, the one thing they could never say is that it's it's George's crowning achievement or something like that.
Right.
And I don't know what it would be like to create something out of nothing, and then to get to a point where you're frustrated by how people receive it, and then you sell it, and then people are excited again. And only what it seems like to him, who's probably not online, who hasn't seen, he in this profile, he says he hasn't watched the trailers, he hasn't watched any of it. That basically, probably right now, what he's thinking is like, so I was the piece, I was the thing that was the obstacle that people had all this,
right.
It's like, yeah, so I could kind of understand the more
which is where Spielberg's comments.
Yeah, like
what we're talking about. That's where it's like, really, Steve? This is
he could have
the
said,
one that now that I'm no longer there, this is the greatest movie ever made.
It's like, where is this thing where it's like, it's fantastic. I've seen it 3 times. It's a wonderful continuation of this franchise that my friend George has created. I really feel that it does stay true to his vision in as much as it can, since he's not involved. That kind of, maybe I'm trying to put words in Spielberg's mouth. Maybe he honestly says, George, your prequel sucked. It's like you were a bad steward of your own creation. Maybe that's how he feels. It's that's fair. I mean, if that's what he takes. I mean, well, Spielberg's only had one. He's only been part of one franchise. I'm sorry, that's not true. He was in the Indiana Jones, but he's not a franchise guy. Yeah, he's made 2 sequels in all of his films. Lost World, which people didn't care as much for as they did the original, and Indiana Jones, which until Crystal Skull had kind of people thought could do no wrong.
Right. So what do you make of, on a related topic, the news that came out this week that initially Spielberg, Zemeckis, and Ron Howard were all offered a chance to direct The Phantom Menace, and neither one of them did it.
Wow, that would have been, it's kind of... It's interesting, but the kind of stuff I had kind of gleaned from that is that a lot of the reason that one, I'm not a huge Robert Zemeckis fan. First and foremost.
Yeah, that would have been... I can't imagine a Zemeckis Star Wars movie.
He's one of those guys, and I'm trying to think, it's like, Back to the Future and name me another one of his big. I could just look it up. I have a computer.
The Polar Express.
Yeah, I mean, I always think about the idea that he's the one who goes, he keeps making these movies, and then he goes, there should be a special award just for us, that kind of thing, where he wanted to create right. I honestly, Robert Zemeckis.
Here's the thing. Oh, I guess he did Who Framed Roger Rabbit too.
Yeah. And that's a movie I never saw. That's a movie I never saw until years later, and I liked it, but it's not something I grew up with. So. And
he directed Gump.
Yeah, and I've seen that movie.
Castaway.
And see,
which is odd because for some reason I think of those as Spielberg movies.
That's funny because even not even thinking about this, every single movie he makes, I either didn't like, felt indifferent about, or as time goes on, my assessment of it is reduced. It's that kind of strange.
Apparently I forgot he did Death Becomes Her, which I liked.
See, and that's I'm kind of
indifferent. I mean, it's not amazing. But
I'm indifferent to it, I guess, is my point. It's Romancing
the Stone,
which was a fun movie. I'm sure now if I watched it, some of the stuff.
I can't stand Romancing the Stone.
Yeah, see, it was. I was a cable kid, and that was on cable all the time. I mean, so it's usually those kind of movies. That's a nostalgia. Like I said, Back to the Future. It's one of those movies. Every time I see it, I like it less and less.
Yeah,
and I have this joke on Twitter that I keep saying, and maybe I'm trying too hard even repeating it, but I honestly feel that when I'm older, people will look back at Back to the Future kind of. Almost not in the same way, because I'm exaggerating Twitter, that almost like Birth of the Nation. It's that thing where it's it's artistically significant, but the messages are horrifying. And you can go and I'm out in the weeds here, but you can go out and watch some interviews with Crispin Glover, and he kind of opened my eyes. I mean, and it's become a running joke now. It's if you watch back, I think was it Mulaney that had a bit about it in his new special about this. About how problematic that movie can be, about how, he talks about the pitch meeting, and it's, it's he goes back in time and his mother wants to have sex with him, but no, it's the school bully almost rapes her. And then he invents rock and roll instead of African Americans. It's the kind of the weird messages of that movie, they get weirder and weirder as time goes on. But anyway, I'm not here to indict Robert Zemeckis rather than... I'm not here to indict.
Well, I'll say this though. I mean, those three directors, I think what's interesting about that group, hearing that group of three directors, is in one of the DVD extras or some kind of featurette for episode 3, when they were talking about the visual effects, Rick McCallum was saying whatever we do, it's exciting because we're sort of inventing this stuff. And then whatever we do, Steven Spielberg and Robert Zemeckis and Ron Howard are then going to take and put in their movies. Right. And so it's this kind of big deal. And so you think, okay, well, what would the pitch to these three people have been other than, they're friends with George Lucas. So maybe help a brother out. The pitch I would imagine would be, you get to be on the cutting edge of this new digital way of making movies completely digitally, digital cameras, that kind of thing. And so for them to turn it down, I think was actually probably a smart move, not just because in retrospect, we know that the prequels weren't made very well, but you could say, okay, well, they would make them differently, but I think that it was a smart call because, to be on the forefront of that kind of technology, there's a lot of risk, and knowing how Lucas was with I almost said Revenge of the Jedi, which was the original title, but Return of the Jedi, right, with Marquand, where he was basically over Marquand's shoulder all the time saying, no, put the camera here. This is how a Star Wars movie is shot. Put the camera here, put the camera there. Maybe he would have been softer with Zemeckis or Ron Howard, but he probably would he probably would be firm in terms of no, we're making this movie digitally. As the producer, he has some say in that. So he would have some say in, okay, we're making this movie in a particular way. And there's a lot of risk in being, at the forefront of that, which is what makes it, exciting in one sense. But, isn't it so much better than to see someone else do it, let ILM work out the kinks of like, okay, how do we do this? How do we animate Yoda and without making him look ridiculous, which I'm not sure they ever figured out, but
yeah, they didn't. They weren't able to because the Phantom Menace he was a silicone puppet, which they had to eventually replace when it came out on Blu-ray.
Right, and so okay, so then instead do exactly what McCallum said. Wait for ILM to do it the first time, and then the second time around they have to do a similar thing. They'll be that much better at it because they know what not to do. And actually in Zemeckis' case, he did kind of move into being at the forefront of that kind of motion capture, performance capture stuff with, the Polar Express, which I made a joke about, and Beowulf. And those movies were not received very well, and especially the Polar Express. All of the reviews I remember at least were like, yeah, all of these characters look dead in the eyes, and it ends up being kind of creepy rather than, amazing and imagination capturing and everything.
Yeah.
And so he I guess later learned like that can come back and bite you. And so I think it was probably smart on their part to turn it down just because, right, you're in whole new territory, and they would have probably known who to go to get the scripts written in a better way, but maybe not. Maybe Lucas would have insisted on just writing the script himself, and that they wouldn't have pushed Lucas to improve it in any way. To go out and get help to write the thing, maybe, because he's their friend, and maybe so, maybe not. And so you say, okay, well, they would have been made better if Ron Howard did it than Lucas doing. Anything would be better. That would be kind of the extreme anti-prequel view that, well, anything would have been better than the prequels. So,
right,
that's not a consideration. But I mean, it's, part of what the problems with the prequels were. Some of it was Lucas himself, but some of it was just that they were kind of making it up as they went along in a lot of ways. And Lucas was asking them to do a lot, was asking ILM to do a lot that they had never done before. And he was just basically throwing it at them and say, okay, figure it out. And I don't know that would have been much different if any of these other three directors would have done it.
Yeah, I know. It's like the only thing I can think of now, because I was doing a little research while you were talking, the world, if Ron Howard had done it, who's probably, I actually, out of the three, I think would have been the most suitable. We would have been denied the 1999's Ed TV, which I don't think I've ever seen.
Oh.
I mean, I like Ron Howard. I mean, Apollo 13 is one of my favorite films of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And him having come off of that, maybe he was turned off about the idea of like, I just made this huge movie that required me to be in the, what do they call it? The vomit comet, the airplane that does whatever they call it. So they can make artificial zero gravity or low gravity. Mm-hmm. Maybe he was like, yeah, maybe I don't want to be in something that's going to have this much special effects, because it is kind of like, of course, then again, he did How the Grinch Stole Christmas the next time. I mean, obviously I'm speculating heavily. I think a lot of it came down to that. From what I gathered from the article is that I think they didn't like the idea that they didn't have any say in the script. And if we know much if you've read any biographies about Lucas, his writing process is pained at best. Yeah. And this would probably be one of those scenarios where you always hear about like when productions of movies go awry. It's usually some actor will say we were getting new script pages every day. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what might have happened in a scenario like that. I mean, because that's kind of, if you watch the beginning documentary, as they call it, which is an extra on the Phantom Menace, that you could see that there was a kind of sense of, well, we're getting new script pages every day, kind of.
Right. Right. And we've talked about it on this show, but and it was true of this movie, the pod race, was storyboarded, but I don't know if it was ever like scripted. I think it just, Lucas kind of gave a sense of what he wanted, but without ever committing it to the page. Or, when you get to episode 2 and when the Clone Wars start on Geonosis at the end, right? The script, it says, and then all hell breaks loose. And that's all that ILM had to go on in terms of what was supposed to happen. He basically just told them, okay, do a Videomatic, and, do whatever you want. I'll give you a free hand within, maybe not totally free hand, but, I'll let you all kind of do what you want, and then I'll tell you what to fix after you do it. And that's a super inefficient way to work. So, if you add even another layer in between where you have a director looking to George Lucas and saying like, look, what am I supposed to tell my people? And Lucas says like, well, we'll work together on this. We'll figure this out together. Like directors hate that, right? That's why they're a director, is because they want to have control over that stuff. And they wouldn't have had that if they had taken that on. I don't.
Yeah, it's kind of like the funny. I watched for the first time. I had never watched any of those Project Greenlight things because it just never. Mm-hmm. I never thought it would interest me. And then some people were talking about it on Twitter, so I gave it a try, and it kind of really opened my eyes. And made me realize that I was very naive about the way movies were made. Mm-hmm. And of course, this is a $3 million movie made for HBO with no thought of it ever being released theatrically. But it really did open my eyes to the idea of the director versus the producer versus the writer versus the people with money, and the fact that everyone's agenda seems to be different. And it's in some ways, George Lucas created almost like a perfect system by, keeping those movies directed by him in his own little world. And although I would say that Attack of the Clones, a lot, the whole idea, the way it's structured, the subjects, honestly feels like a reaction to what people thought about the Phantom Menace. Like, he was affected by that so much, so that he actually made a movie that went against his best instincts. It doesn't, Star Wars movies generally hit the ground running, so to speak. Even if you want to say, oh, everything is in the cyclical style, at least they hit, even though that they do slow down, like say, okay, but every Star Wars starts with a battle. Empire Strikes Back starts with, our hero being, assaulted. Mm-hmm. Jedi, starts with, Jedi has its own problems, but
right.
That doesn't necessarily, I guess that one doesn't necessarily start with action.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole Jedi is almost, the whole Jabba sequence, it's almost like an extended, like when a James Bond movie has overture.
It's a set piece.
Yeah. And, so he was affected, but he did have this kind of insular, this world that if, you start bringing Ron Howard into it, and then, well, if Ron Howard's involved, then, well, is Brian Grazer, he's going to be like, hey, I need to get we're a production team. I need to be involved in this and somehow. So now he's got, this producer, and he doesn't have like Rick McCallum, who, I don't know much about Rick McCallum as a professional producer, but I get the feeling his job was not to be an impediment to George. It was literally, how do I get George what he wants for the money he's willing to spend? It's not, it wasn't his,
right? Because that's the other key to this, is that it was George Lucas's money.
Yeah. And it wasn't Rick, people always piss all over Rick McCallum that he was just a yes man. It's like his job, was not to say, George, basing your entire movie on a 10-year-old who can barely act is a bad idea. I mean, his was to get the movie made. I mean, he was not an artistic producer. And I'm starting to realize that, producers are not artists.
Mm-hmm.
And, in a lot of ways, they are the money people. They are the expediters of the director's vision. Now, that when you have a situation where it's a one guy thing, you can have it be like, well, I'm just doing his will. When you get something like Disney, where it's like, I mean, who's the official producer of this movie? Is it just J.J. Abrams and Kathleen?
I think it's Kathleen Kennedy and Abrams and maybe one other person.
Yeah.
Whoever J.J. Abrams works with at Bad Robot.
Yeah, but is Bad Robot's name anywhere on this, though? I thought they kind of hired him out.
I don't know.
I think they hired him out. Okay. That was the whole thing where they were trying to...
Yeah, because I guess Bad Robot has its other own projects that it's working on that Abrams can actually go promote in, like, January.
It's definitely a different deal than he had, say, with Paramount in doing Star Trek. I mean, I think that they took Star Trek and they made that a Bad Robot production. He became the de facto, Gene Roddenberry for this, and where, I think we've established now that for Star Wars, essentially the brain trust of the new Star Wars thing is really Kathleen Kennedy, and then Simon Kinberg is kind of the the Agent Callus, if we want to turn it back in. He's out doing their bidding, and J.J. Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan are just temp workers for this idea. Boy, I feel like I really gotten off topic here. But.
So let's bring it back. So the initial question was, how are we feeling about this movie? So I will say, I've mentioned this on the show before, but for those of our listeners just joining us, right? I went in. I got to a point in this movie where it was like, I want to have no expectations going in, positive or negative. I just want to see this movie, and if it's good, fine. If it's bad, it won't bother me, right? Like water running off a duck's back, right? That kind of idea, right? I just want to see the movie and either enjoy it or move on. As I'm seeing more footage and as I'm reading more about the things, and not even seeing footage, but seeing, the costumes and the characters and all of this, those kinds of the artwork, all that kind of stuff. I think I'm hopeful. I'm actually hopeful that I will enjoy it. Rather than having like a neutral position, I am hopeful that I will enjoy it. I am excited to hear John Williams' score, which I'll touch on just a bit later. I want to see it. I'm genuinely curious as to what this movie will be like, because as we've been talking about, right, this is new, right? A Star Wars movie that George Lucas has zero involvement in, essentially.
Right.
And so I'm genuinely, there's like an intellectual curiosity piece of this, of like, okay, so what will this be like? That said, whenever I see or hear about Adam Driver's performance in this movie, I get super nervous. I've already talked about the fact that I don't like the voice very much, Kylo Ren's voice.
What voice is that?
Oh, this voice? I will finish what you started. Sorry. I will finish what you started.
Oh, man. It's like, Kyle, can you speak up? Well, we couldn't quite hear that.
I'm pretty sure that they only hired Adam Driver because Lorenzo Music is no longer with us.
Oh. Jeez.
but like today, again, J.J. Abrams was quoted somewhere talking about Adam Driver's preparation for this movie and how he would yell. He would just yell a lot right before they shot a take. And just that, like, he loves that ferocity that Adam Driver brought to this character. And I just read that and I think that's like a parody of the worst kind of, like, methody, super intense. I have to get inside this character. I have to be this evil person. Like, it just reads like a parody of what like that approach to that kind of acting is supposed to be. Like, it sounds awful. And you know, I flashed back to that Vanity Fair spread from a long time ago, and the photo of Adam Driver minus the mask. And at the time, I called him doughy, which isn't true. He's not big enough to be doughy. I'm doughy. He's not doughy. But it was mostly his cheeks. Like in that photo, it looks like he still has like baby fat in his cheeks or something. And it just like I am worried that the way this movie has been marketed, a lot of it is going to rest on how much we buy Kylo Ren as a villain. Yeah. And I am really worried that part of it is just not going to hold up. That everything else might work, but that those scenes are not going to work, and that because of that, everything else is just going to fall apart. Because if you don't have like a really credible villain, then, you know, when Kylo Ren is doing action and he's, you know, using his lightsaber, whatever, like that all seems fine. But at any time he has to talk or I have to see his face, like I just get really concerned that it's going to be cheesy and, you know, it's just going to fall flat.
Yeah.
And that has, I don't know how much that has to do with Adam Driver, who I don't think I've ever seen in anything, and how much that has to do with like the direction he got from JJ. I can't imagine J.J. Abrams told him to yell a lot before a take. That seems like, you know, he brought that to the character himself. But like, because that's how he thinks, it's almost as if Adam Driver thinks that's how it's supposed to be, and so he does that.
Yeah, I watched this brief,
but I don't know how much of that is like, is Adam Driver doing that because that's his actual process, or because he thinks that's how he is supposed to act in that circumstance?
I did glean something from an interview with him briefly before the show started. It was a video interview. He doesn't watch his own work, so he has no idea what he looks like on screen. Really, he claimed that he only seen like half an episode of Girls, and he hasn't seen any of his movies. And yeah, there's this weird kind of like not intense, like, you know, like humorless, where Sean Penn is like, you know, that guy is like humorless. He's like, I wouldn't want to be even in the same restaurant as that guy, because you just know it's like he gives off a weird energy. There's a kind of a goofiness to Adam Driver, which is kind of interesting, because it's like he was a Marine, which I didn't know. He was a U.S. Marine. I don't know anything about his military career, but in this interview, she goes, "You were a Marine," and he goes, "Yeah," and he goes, "You know, he was, you know, what is this? Which one of these things was harder?" And he goes, "Yeah, boot camp was harder." And I mean, and I have a cousin who was a Marine, and just like to hear the stories about what it's like to go through basic training as a Marine, that's like that's like, it's like almost like choosing to go into a trauma. Yeah, I mean, the great thing about it is that when you come out of it, and if you come out of it successfully, you are a Marine, right? Which, you know, is I think that's a great thing to aspire to be, but it's intense, and I think it might change you. But I mean, so it's the idea where it's like, it's almost like when you first look at him, you think, oh, is this like Jim Bullock from Spaceballs? Is that, you know, is this kind of, is he going to be a dandy boy with his like, oh, hey everybody, what's going on? I think I'm going to finish what you started.
I will finish what you started.
I mean, I understand exactly what you're saying, that, you know, if he's made an artistic choice in playing this character and he misjudged it, it completely will collapse. And then there could be a situation where, you know, where when you play a kind of almost a mustache twirling bad guy, and I'm trying to think of like when the, you know, Bane, who was another guy who was like, and that was an interesting villain. But really, honestly, a lot of people's keying off of that was his voice. I mean, he, you know, he did all that exercising and he was so buff, but people are really kind of like, I mean, it's almost like he learned his lesson in Mad Max by, he says even less, you know?
I mean, the Bane voice, like, throughout the movie, I just kept thinking he was J. Peterman from Seinfeld.
Oh, yes, Gotham's reckoning. The smell of Gotham's reckoning.
Hence I was returning. You know, that kind of thing.
But the last time that I saw like a really great performance that in any other, if it had been done wrong, it would have just been like laugh out loud in the aisle thing, is Joaquin Phoenix playing Commodus in Gladiator, which he plays it so broad and so kind of petulant and whiny and stuff, but it works so well in that movie, which, you know, that movie, again, if you revisit it, it's not as deep as you. The first time you see it, you think, oh my God, this was fantastic. You go back and watch it now, you're like, oh gosh, there's some real doozies in this. But his performance is great. It's just the kind of like, you know, effete, whiny guy, but when he really feels pushed, he goes into this menace of, and he has real power. I mean, he could have killed his enemies at any point, but he had bigger plans, and eventually he gets his comeuppance and whatever. I mean, I hope that that's kind of, if he's going for if Adam Driver is going for an affected performance, that it falls more in that realm. But then again, if the tone of the movie doesn't match up, it's gonna be very easily. I mean,
I guess I'm just flashing back to the prequels and Hayden Christensen's performance as Anakin. And whenever he got mad, it just came out as this kind of like pissy little immature, you know, this kind of like immature, you know, it just didn't work for me, and that's what I'm worried that this is going to turn into.
Well, the only thing I can say to make you feel better is that every interview I've ever heard said that is exactly what George Lucas wanted.
I know, I know,
and that's what he told Hayden Christensen to do, and he picked up on that and he brought it up, and and even Hayden Christensen was a little like, I don't know. I mean, that's the, you know, I don't know. Hayden Christensen never, I don't think I've ever actually got to see him in a role where he really got to, you know, stretch his chops or whatever. I never got to see that movie where he played he played some journalist that plagiarized his articles or manufactured them or whatever. And everybody says that was kind of his quintessential performance. But yeah, I know what you're saying. It's just this kind of, it's that whole thing where it's like, well, we're doing it the way you like it. We're doing everything the way you like it. Well, if you know, if 12-year-old J.J. Abrams, or I don't know how old he was when Star Wars came out, if what he keyed off of is like, there's a chance he keyed off something completely different than I did. And that could affect the whole, you know, what his is like, oh, you know, well, we have, you know, we do have room in Star Wars movies for dandies, because look, you know, Tarkin was a bit of a dandy in that movie. You know, he was, you know, erudite and, you know, well coiffed and petulant to the very end. It's like, oh, we could do this, or, you know, even Dooku had that flourish of the well, almost like an aristocracy. I mean, they're both English and of a certain generation. It's it's kind of funny how, like, we've gone. Everybody's worried about where's Mark Hamill. Everybody's worried, is Han Solo gonna die? No one's really worried if Boyega and Ridley are gonna be able to pull this off.
Yeah.
But nobody's talking about Adam Driver, and he's supposed to be the big bad for all intents purposes. I mean, he is the guy on my fleece blanket that my dog's sleeping on right now. He's supposed to be the kid. Darth Vader that's a pretty big. Those are big boots to fill. I mean, there's something so iconic about Vader that it's almost like unless they really have come up with there's all this talk that, he's not Vader. He's kind of a fanboy of Vader. It's like, well, you've already diminished. It's like, so he's not, we already know he's not going to be as strong as Vader. It's that kind of idea. He's not going to be as iconic.
Is Vader diminished? Right.
I mean, Vader is
he's not going to be as powerful as Vader.
And to make it almost personal, the funny thing, in 1978, something like that, for me to go to a shopping center and be 30 feet away from a guy in a costume, probably the janitor dressed up as Darth Vader signing thing, and have it scare me, and then to jump forward 38 years and to have my nieces who are that same age now, they're still scared of the guy. Right. Like my youngest niece, if she's like, she'll come over to the house and she'll be like, why? Because I got Star Wars posters everywhere. Why do you have Darth Vader on your wall? It's like, he's scary. Why would you have this scary guy on your wall? So I mean, is Kylo Ren going to scare people like that? It's
right.
and people will like wonder, like, well, maybe that's not important. That's not the story we're telling. But if you're dealing with a movie that's archetypes, and you don't respect that, you're going to be, you're going to be sad. You're going to be sad. Like, people are going to. I mean, yeah, he could be the weak point of this entire thing, or hell, for all we know, the our legacy players could be be the weak link. Could be like, oh, it was all great until Harrison Ford showed up. Even though, I don't know, man, everything I've seen, it's like he put that on like an old suit, and the suit still fits.
Right. Well, and the other piece of this too is we've heard, as I mentioned earlier, we've heard that, or I guess this must have been before the show, but we've heard that Captain Phasma is more of a Boba Fett type role, that we're not actually going to see her that much in the movie, and we're certainly not going to see her with her helmet off, and I don't even think she has very much dialogue. But so then you have Kylo Ren, but you also have General Hux, and you have Snoke, and you have these other major villains that maybe Kylo Ren, maybe his role is not as big as the trailer would have us believe, right? Because the trailers have focused on him as the bad guy, and the ads that have had the Snoke, there has been an awakening, right? That hints at his role, but we haven't really seen Donald Gleason at all.
No.
And one of my longstanding questions has been, like, they have a lot of sizable roles, big name character, like you said, the legacy characters, and maybe Luke Skywalker's role isn't very big in this one, but you still have Han and Leia, and you have the droids, and you have BB-8 that you have to introduce, and you have Rey and Finn and Poe, and then you have, like I said, Phasma and Kylo Ren and Snoke and Hux that you'll have to manage screen time for, and how much story they take up. And so, I mean, maybe Kylo Ren is there, and he clearly has that lightsaber battle with Finn, but I mean, we don't really know how much else he does outside of that.
Right, it could be a bit of a what's the proper term? Would he be a paper tiger? Would they call that, or a?
Well, yeah, or he he's sort of a presence in this movie, but it is to set up a bigger role in the next movie, you know.
Yeah, because I get
though then Benicio del Toro is the bad guy in the next movie, so I don't know what's happening there either.
Yeah, it's like, so obviously I actually have a theory about Kylo Ren that I don't know if you want me to spoil it or anything, but
Go for it, if you want.
I have a theory that he's actually going to turn out to be, he's going to be a bad guy until something happens, and that he's going to flip sides at the end. And that he will be, either he'll die or he will be a part of the next cadre of people of the Force, and that, you know, maybe this Snoke guy is the real, you know, because the Empire was so nebulous in Star Wars. We just knew they were bad, and then by the time Empire, it was a solidified threat,
right?
Because it's like, well, yeah,
and then you have this, you know, where Kylo gets his name, the Knights of Ren,
right?
Which do they like? How much influence do they have as a group outside of Kylo Ren? You know?
Yeah, it's, you know, there's so much. I mean, I'm speculating heavily. I mean, that's the. You know, it goes to be like, well, you know, they've almost all but said that, you know, that Rey is the child of least of Princess Leia, because they kept on saying
that's the assumption that a lot of people are making.
Yeah, and it's like, well, it could be completely different. They could find out, you know. It'd be interesting if all of a sudden in the last third of the movie that they tell some story about how, you know, Luke had a wife named Mara and they had 2 children and they put him in hiding, and then something happened and one went good and one went bad. And, you know, it's just like, oh, wait a second. What? You know, it doesn't take a brainiac to speculate in this way, obviously, because it could be. I will say that most of the time when I've had these theories about Star Wars, they tend to end up being the most simple,
right,
explanation. Sorry, the dog's like growling.
No, that's all right. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, a lot of why some of these theories are gaining so much traction is because they make a lot of sense, narratively and in terms of, you know, how to bridge the older era and the newer era. And, you know, you and I are both like, well, let's not rush to judgment, and, you know, Finn having a lightsaber doesn't necessarily mean that he can use the Force. It could just be that that's what he had on hand, and, you know, all this stuff. And at some point you kind of just have to say, you know, we're probably overcomplicating this.
Yeah. I mean, that's how it works in my brain.
Yeah.
I was thinking about this. Star Wars is kind of, I think I'm, you know, it might taken all this time, but I think Star Wars is kind of, special to me in my mind, because it's one of the few things that exist that I've never been good at extrapolating how it would continue. You know how people go, oh, you know, I love Terminator things, and I love the Terminator. If I was going to write a Terminator sequel, I would write this. And then everybody has fun and you sit around and talk about it. Star Wars is one of those weird things that I have never had a really, truly original idea about how it progresses. So when it comes to me, it's perfect, because it's like, oh, I'm getting another chunk of the story. Because I like to think of myself as a creative person. And in the past, I've written stories and things. And I've never tried to tackle anything related to Star Wars. Even when I was a kid and I played Star Wars, I kept it I kind of kept it within the realm of what had been given to me. And I think that there's nothing like else in existence, like Star Trek. I've talked about Star Trek. I remember being in a Denny's in college, you know, chain smoking, drinking coffee, talking about how the 3rd season of Twin Peaks would have been if I had written it.
Right.
Star Wars it's like one of those things where it's like, I think I get anxious because I'm like, I have to take what you're giving me, because for some reason in my brain, there's a block. I can never write what it should be, because it never feels right. And when it comes out, whether it's a prequel or a cartoon, even if I don't like it, I have to respect That's how that's Star Wars. That's how it goes. That's what they've made. You know, it's like I could sit there and argue like, well, I don't really like, I don't like the way this is going. But it's like, well, I don't have any other ideas on how it should be. Yes, I make speculations and about reveals and stuff like that, but I have no vested interest in, the Rey and Kylo Ren being the children of Luke Skywalker. It's just I'm just throwing it out there. I'd actually prefer them to come up with something I couldn't think of.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's it.
So we're sort of starting to talk about this now anyway, but another big thing that I've been thinking about is the pace in which we are getting new ads, new TV spots, has certainly picked up in the last couple of weeks. And we're getting, certainly it's a lot of the same footage or slightly different footage, different shots, different angles of the same scene from the movie. But we're getting a lot of, slightly different looks in a short period of time where they had, the kind of main ads, but then we got different ads and TV spots that focused on different characters. There was sort of a Rey-centric ad and a Kylo Ren-centric ad and a Finn-centric ad, and, the different character-specific posters and the overall posters. And now there are these kind of retro-looking posters that are just, plain black with white text.
Yeah, I saw those.
So what do you think of this strategy of how they're marketing this as we get, we're less than a month away from this movie?
I mean, I know that these things don't come out without a kind of almost a scientific examination of how to market it, because it's like you don't make a movie. I mean, I don't know how much this movie costs to make. I've looked. Some people said it's in upwards of $200 million. Really, if you add in licensing and stuff, it's $500 million to make this one movie, and it's going to fund the rest of them. They don't. It's like I think they have such a high confidence in their product that they almost not like hubris, because I don't think they're being flippant. I think they're being very calculated in the way they market. Because it's... I mean, I think it's hard for me to come up with anything really, truly original to say about this. But it's because, like, I keep seeing, like, headlines like, Star Wars, how to market the movie that doesn't need to be marketed. And I think they're just trying to get people to go, hey, this is going to be really fun. We're going to have a good time. And it's almost like they know they got the Star Wars nerds. They got the Star Wars podcast. There's no question that, you, me, and our significant others are going to get drug along with this. That we're going, the guys, all the guys my age are going to go. And trust me, even the guys that are like, that go, prequels sucked, they're going to be there too. I think that they're really trying to market to people that literally have grown up not knowing anything about Star Wars and not really caring. Be like, it's on Spike. I watch it, on a Saturday and then between football games. Honestly, I think that's what they're trying to get people that maybe aren't excited about going to movies excited about going to see this movie. Maybe they are saying, like, remember the time when a movie would come out and it would be the number one movie in the country for like 4 months? It's like, which, hasn't happened ever. I mean, no matter how
now,
much...
if you get 4 weeks, then you are lucky,
Yeah, it's that kind of weird...
And even then, the studio is like, all right, we got another one we need to get out. You need to...
Yeah, and it's always like a surprise. It's like, I don't think anybody was that... I think everybody was a little taken back about how well... Jurassic World did. I think Universal knew they had a proven franchise and a proven actor, but they, I think they probably even in their heart of hearts knew that they had a pretty flimsy story.
Right.
And,
yeah, I would imagine that Colin Trevorrow, what's his first name?
Yeah, Trevorrow.
Yeah, Trevorrow. I imagine he's thrilled with Spielberg, talking about the Star Wars. Oh, this is going to be the greatest movie ever. It's like, yeah, I was working on your movies. Exactly. You want to throw me a bone here? You don't even have the heart to like say that Jurassic World was good,
right? I think that they're really trying to really go for something. I'm not even talking artistically. I'm just talking monetarily, of course. But this idea that, like, well, maybe, we can't go back in time and make your favorite characters, 30 and have it be a movie that takes place, 2 hours after Return of the Jedi. That's, done. George is not involved. And it's like, but, there is a kind of, there was a buzz in the air when Star Wars came out, even though it was a much smaller buzz because we didn't have internet and people weren't as connected in their communications. But, the fact that, that first night when he's sitting over at my man's Chinese theater in a hamburger restaurant and says, what's that line around the block for? He goes, that's for your movie, George. And his first reaction was like, well, call me in 2 weeks after all the nerds have gone.
Right.
Twice, and then we'll see if I've done well. And I think they might be trying to gear up for, trying to like, well, how do we make it be the number one movie for 4 weeks? All the way through all the kids in school and all the thing, and into January, which, they've set themselves up. If they had released this in May, as they traditionally did, they would immediately be like, they would have had Age of Ultron and all these other movies, kind of, even Jurassic World, coming out, and it would have been like, oh, it was number one movie for 2 weeks. But they're kind of in that great thing where, the only competition they have that week is the Leonardo DiCaprio, movie where he gets supposedly violated by a bear.
Right. Right.
So, January has always traditionally been kind of like the dead zone for all released no big records come out, no big video games come out, no big movies come out. So they have like this level, they have this completely like blank slate where they could, with the marketing right and stuff like that, they could just continue and be marketing for a movie that's going to have real staying power in the theater, which is, hasn't been a thing. There hasn't been staying power in the theater since maybe Titanic. I mean, obviously Avatar did really well too, where people would go see that multiple times. And I think they're totally like, I'm sure it'll come out and in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, they'll start going, you can go back to the universe or whatever. And then they'll have another ad to try to get people excited. And then they go, hey, maybe we'll go take the kids to see Force Awakens again.
Right.
I mean, I think that's what the marketing is really. They're getting people that wouldn't necessarily want to see a Star Wars movie, or don't even care, or they're like, I don't get this. I don't want to have to watch 6 movies to get this. And I think that's how you get a blockbuster. That's how you get a true, highest grossing film of all time kind of thing, is like you appeal to people that go, they don't know their Star Wars from their Star Trek.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. I guess the thing I've thought was interesting, as I said, is just you're getting slightly different looks at this movie in each of these ads and these TV spots. Not entirely different. There's a lot of overlap in footage, but it's not just this same. We're not just seeing the same ad repetitively over and over again. And I think that's going to be really important for maybe not actively hooking in those fans that you were just talking about, but at the very least, making sure that it's not so easy for people to just parody and get tired of, and, just make fun of, oh, the plinky piano, and then, who are you? Right? You're not going to see like a bunch of jokes about people just going like, who are you?
Yeah.
Over and over again, because you're not seeing it over and over again. You're not getting hit over the head with that same ad time and time again. You're getting a slightly different ad. Maybe you'll get the Kylo Ren ad, and then later you'll see, the main one, and then maybe you'll see just a really quick, one of the really quick ones where, Rey sees all the ships flying overhead and everything. And so I think actually, to the extent that I ever feel like praising a marketing effort, I think they've done a decent job of walking that line between, changing it up, varying it so that people don't feel like they're just seeing the same ad over and over again and getting annoyed by it, but then also not revealing too much about the movie, right? We're still just seeing the same handful of scenes over and over, just slightly different footage and slightly different dialogue. Maybe we're getting, the first couple seconds of that scene, and then later we're getting like the middle couple seconds of that scene. And so, yeah, I think they've done a decent job with that. I certainly can see why Abrams, at this point, anytime he's asked about this movie, he's just like, I'm just really excited for people to see this movie, right? It's like, okay, we're ready. Let's just put the movie out so that people can see it. And
I know people.
We can stop talking about what we think the thing is going to be and asking the people who made it what it was like, and just actually see the thing for ourselves.
I mean, it's in the can, right? It's done.
It is now, yeah.
Because the music was the last thing, right?
Yeah, and I think there were still some visual effects that they were locking in, but I think that's all locked in now. And yeah, we did get the track listing for the soundtrack, so that means that is done. I would expect.
So, do we want to talk a little bit about that, or you still want to talk about the marketing stuff?
Well, do you have anything more you wanted to add about the marketing?
No, I mean, I think that's about it. I mean, that's my opinion is that they want to reach as many people as possible, which some movies do they do targeted marketing. They're like, the Leonardo DiCaprio Bear thing, which I haven't watched because people say, I'm actually interested in that movie, but people say that they almost give the whole thing away in the trailer anyway. And so it's like, that's being very marketed to being like, well, this is the kind of movie you're going to get if you don't want to see Star Wars, if you're a grown up, and I like grown up movies, but not the week that Star Wars has come out. I'm not going to go see it. They're very targeted marketing to people that go, Star Wars sucks. I want to see something for grown-ups. And and that's a very targeted, whereas I think this is a much broader kind of attempt. Yeah.
I think that's right. And again, which is weird because then so much of it and so much of this movie, they are appealing to that nostalgia of, remember what it was like the first time you saw Star Wars, or, trying to recapture a lot of those elements from the original trilogy. And so I think like I said, I think they've done a decent job of walking the line between taking that approach, but then also recognizing like they can't solely rely on that, because once you rely on that, you necessarily leave out a lot of people for whom those original movies didn't hit quite so hard.
Right.
Excuse me. So the soundtrack. This was one of the things we alluded to earlier, where. Oh, sorry. I had to ask Robert. I said, "Have you seen this? And do you want to talk about it, or do you want to be surprised?" And Robert said, "Well, I don't want to be spoiled on this." So we're not gonna talk about a soundtrack listing too much, but there is one track that kind of caught my eye that I thought was really interesting, and it's not really a spoiler, but it's called Scherzo for X-Wing. And what I thought was really interesting is because of Scherzo, for those of you who did not major or minor in music,
me,
right?
I don't
know.
A
Scherzo, the word, I don't know if it's a literal translation or if it's an approximate translation. It's Italian. It means joke, essentially, and it in music it refers to kind of a lighthearted passage or a lighthearted movement. It's usually the third movement of a four-movement work, either a symphony or a string quartet or something. So it's either the third movement out of four or the second movement out of three. Sometimes, but it's it's kind of like lighthearted. You get a lot of kind of pizzicato strings and kind of sly orchestration that's very I guess I would, what comes to mind from the Star Wars soundtracks, to give a frame of reference, isn't one that's necessarily lighthearted, but it's when Luke. It's from A New Hope when Luke and C-3PO are out in the speeder. They're looking for R2-D2, and you get this kind of like pizzicato strings, like do 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 do. And then the Sand People show up. But just that kind of... So if you listen to Tchaikovsky's Fourth Symphony, he has a scherzo movement in there, and it's not too dissimilar in the way it starts out. Or another... This isn't necessarily a scherzo, but... there's a string quartet that was used in the Royal Tenenbaums, where it's this kind of like pizzicato. I think it's in the beginning when Alec Baldwin's kind of introducing all the characters, and it's this pizzicato strings idea. That kind of feeling to it. And I guess I just thought that was really interesting because we've gotten kind of lighthearted moments in both the dialogue and in the score for the previous 6 Star Wars movies from John Williams, but I don't know that we've gotten something that's sort of stated as explicitly as like, this is a scherzo, this is like a lighthearted moment. And the fact that it's also for the X-Wing, it's a scherzo for X-Wings. I'm kind of curious to see how this works. I mean, this isn't a scherzo, but I thought of 2001: A Space Odyssey and this, and sort of some of the music that they had in there, and as a soundtrack to space flight and space travel. I'm going to be really curious to see what the scene is that this scherzo is supporting, and just how it fits in. What are the X-Wings doing that it's this kind of lighthearted musical moment? I think that I'm genuinely curious to see what's going on in this movie, that is how John Williams decided, that's what he decided would be the best way to support that scene. The other interesting piece of this is that a scherzo, like I said, is usually the third movement out of 4 movements, or the second movement out of 3, and that's kind of how the trilogies are set up, right? This is essentially the third trilogy, and so I wonder now if we're going to get a fourth trilogy eventually later on, depending on how these do and how the anthology movies do, or even you could say, okay, this is episode 7, it's roughly 2/3 of the way, 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through the 9 movies. And so this is about, in a symphony, this is sort of about where you would put the scherzo. And so it could just be that, John Williams was saying, okay, well, this is sort of 2/3, 3/4 of the way through. Maybe this is a spoiler, maybe not, but the track comes later in the soundtrack. I don't know whether that means it comes later in the film, because, in the, at least the original versions of the Star Wars soundtracks, he would, John Williams and whoever else was sequencing them with him would kind of shift things around so that it wasn't necessarily in chronological order in the way that the special edition soundtracks were. But so it just the idea of the temporal aspect to his scherzo, but then also that lighthearted, playful aspect of it, I think is really interesting, and especially tying it to X-Wings, rather than, it's not like a scherzo for BB-8 or for, the C-3PO or R2-D2 or, even another character who we might think of as, oh, sure, well, maybe Rey has a lighthearted moment, or, Poe has some fun at someone else's expense or something. It's for the X-Wings, and so I'm really curious to see how that plays out in the film. So like I said earlier, I went from this kind of neutral posture to now I'm really curious to see how this movie is made, how it's put together, what it's like.
Yeah, again, I'm still sticking to I don't want all the titles. But would you consider this scherzo use of this word, is it kind of, do they use other musical terms in the titles for these tracks? They don't have like.
That's a good question.
There's no adagio or chorus of the heroes.
I didn't see any in this soundtrack.
Okay,
and I'm quickly finding my folder of the Star Wars the special edition soundtracks to see if I can find anything there, and I don't. I mean, there was the Fox Fanfare,
but I mean, there's
probably the closest thing.
No, I mean,
and then the Imperial March
in the new soundtrack. There's no other indications of.
Not that I recall seeing,
because I almost wondered if he was using these terms as a way to avoid spoilers.
Oh, it's like a placeholder for
not a placeholder, but there was like was it the ruminations of Padme or something like that, or like looking at that, I'm like, I have no idea. She's going to ruminate. What does that mean? Mm-hmm. She's thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's an interesting idea that if it's a kind of like a little doff of the cap to the music nerds about if it's the third part of the, or it's in the last third of the movie, or if it's broken into quarters or God, I can't even imagine it. What if he just used the term wrong?
Yeah,
I'm sure not, because I have this feeling that he's got a staff that he's working with, because
sure.
and the pardon me, the division of labor seems interesting. I mean, I don't really know how he works generally. I mean, I think we've talked about in the past about copyists and that he would compose, and then that you hire somebody to orchestrate or whatever. But I mean, we have talked, I see this thing that's come out that John Williams did not score a part of the movie. Mm-hmm. And I think you know
right,
about
there's a scene of the movie that contains, I guess we'll call it incidental music, probably. It's music that occurs in the world of the movie that John Williams did not write this time.
And I find that really fascinating. I mean, I know that in the past that there has been incidental music that were only tangentially composed. Like, was it John Williams' son had...
Right, the, what is it called?
Lapti Nek,
right. It was based on something his son wrote for Earth. URF or something like that.
Yeah, it was
Earth, URTH, or I don't know.
Yeah, he wrote it's like it had English lyrics, and it was translated into Huttese and done, and of course it's been jettisoned from the film now. It's interesting.
Yeah, so to answer your question, I looked back at the Force Awakens track listing. There is one other track references a march. Okay. But that's the only other musical term. All of the other track listings reference either characters or scenes, some of the action that's taking place in the movie, or locations. And in the original trilogy, as I said, there was the Imperial March, which, March is a musical form. And then there was, in Return of the Jedi, there was Jabba's Baroque recital.
Oh, yes.
Which was, when they first show up. And that was, so,
Did
Williams doesn't do it a lot, but he has done it in the past where he is, explicitly referred to either musical forms or musical styles as a track, as the name of a cue.
And do we know that Jabba's Baroque recital, did he compose that?
I assume so. I don't know why he wouldn't have.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I guess it is.
This is from the original version of Return of the Jedi. This is
right. Oh, come on! I'm trying to look it up, and now it's asking me if I like.
I guess this is sort of what was. Was this on the sailbar? No, this is when the droids show up, I guess, and then
right.
They're playing this, and then the droids play the.
Yeah, it's an organ piece with harpsichord and something.
Yeah, and kind of flute. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it looks like he did it. No, I just find it shocking that, they made such a big deal about him coming back, and he's, they're not using him in the trailer. They used him in the first teaser, but then they didn't use him in the trailer, and then they, and now they're, we're finding out that the movie is like, well, I mean, I don't know. It depends if you consider incidental music to be part of a score. You know, it's kind of, you know, when it was on the original, whatever they call it, concert version of the original soundtrack, the sequencing, though that you know, it was only half of it, and then it was tacked on at the because it was a double vinyl. I want to say it was at the end of the first record. It was the last track. Mm-hmm. And when they remastered it in the 90s and they had a 4-disc box set, it actually relegated all the incidental music to the bonus disc. So when you actually listen to it, they changed they extended stuff. They took all the incidental music and the yub-yubs and the, you know, lapti necks, and they all got moved to the end. Maybe it's not that big of a deal. Maybe he just wanted to. It's like, do you want it all with my name on it, or do you want something truly great? And then I'm gonna have to hand down some of this incidental music to I forget the dude's name. Who's the guy making this? Who's Lin-Manuel Miranda, who wrote the music in the book and is apparently starring in, which I just found out today, Hamilton. The musical Hamilton. Yeah, which is the story of Alexander Hamilton told in rap form. Oh, exciting.
Yeah.
Is he the guy that got shot by Aaron Burr?
Yes.
Okay.
But then also Lin-Manuel Miranda just got a MacArthur grant, sometimes referred to as a genius grant.
Yeah, that's what the word I kept seeing. They kept throwing the word genius about this guy, and at first I was like, oh, what did they get somebody to, you know, oh no, he's a genius. He's a genius. I hope it's not corny though. I hope it's not some like, I've never been a big fan of musical theater, and I know that listeners, that's on me. That's my weakness as a person, but there's a kind of thing when I ever think of it, I think of that super broad, the like, we're gonna put on a show, ba-da-ba-ba kind of thing, and you know, I'm just like, oh really? Because that's exactly what happened when they took, you know, Lapti Nek, which was all right. It was a little jarring when I was a kid and I saw it, but no near as jarring as changing it to Jedi Rocks.
Right. I mean, and that's what I'm a little worried about, that it's going to be another Jedi Rocks, where I mean, say what you will about the music of Jedi Rocks, or, you know, the quality of the song, or, you know, however you feel. I mean, it completely takes you out of that movie.
Yes.
You know, Lapti Nek, again, for whatever you think of Lapti Nek and its quality or whatever, it feels like part of the movie, right? You're still in the scene, you are still experiencing that world. Like the film Return of the Jedi still has some kind of forward momentum through that song, because, you know, that's going on, but you're also seeing Ula the dancer or be you know, kind of fighting against Jabba. Whereas with Jedi Rocks, like, that movie just stops for them to do this long thing, and it kind of loses momentum at that point. And so that's what I'm a little worried about with hearing that. Now, I guess the maybe heartening part of this is that J.J. Abrams and others have been comparing this to the cantina scene in A New Hope, and not to the Jabba's Palace and Jedi Rocks. That's probably intentional, because they know how many people hate Jedi Rocks.
And also, I just realized,
but, you know, so hopefully it is more like the cantina scene, where it's just kind of music in the background to underpin, you know, this character stepping into sort of a larger world, and, you know, seeing all of these creatures that they never knew existed, and, you know, this kind of feeling of disorientation and you know, what is this? Like, where am I? I didn't know this was here. That sense of kind of discovery, rather than Jedi Rocks, where it's like, all right, let's pause the movie for 8 minutes or whatever while we get through this thing.
I will say, while you were talking, I did a little search, and I guess Jedi Rocks was not composed by John Williams. It was by Jerry Hay, who was a trumpeter, flugelhornist, horn arranger, and blah, blah, blah. So, you know, I guess I'm making mountains out of molehills, because really this is kind of how he's been working since the 90s. He does, he did compose some stuff for Jedi at the end. I think he did the Andean flute music, pan flute music. Williams did when they did the special editions, but I guess he's obviously not having him not be the sole composer on the score is not something that just happened in 2015. Right. So it's not, maybe I'm making this into more than it should be.
And on the other side of that, J.J. Abrams has also said that there's about 30 minutes worth of unused John Williams score that he wrote and that they recorded that then ultimately was not used in the movie, but they are going to release it, that music, which I think is interesting. And it makes me wonder, okay, was this music that was written for scenes that were then cut from the movie because, they edited a fair amount to get it down to its current running time? Or was this maybe music, as happened in the past, this is music that was scored and it was meant for scenes that are still in the movie, but they decided, this is too busy. We're just going to take this music out and just let, the sound design and the dialogue carry the scene. It's probably a little bit of both, but I'll be curious to see where the balance is, whether it's more of the former or the latter.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of, you wonder, it's like nobody's ever even fan edits notwithstanding. No one's ever thought about doing like longer cuts of Star Wars movies. It's like,
right,
the economy of them is probably part of their appeal. So I'm wondering if it's one of those things where like, well, we don't want wall to wall music, so maybe we need to cut back and let it breathe a little bit more. It's kind of interesting when I rewatch those movies, and it makes me wonder. It's like I thought that like some of the score, like especially the score when Obi-Wan starts telling Luke about the past and stuff at his house. Like I never even, for some reason in my mind, I never even thought that there was music, and I thought that was something that they added later into special editions. But then when I went back and I started rewatching, I have like those DVDs where they just did the unaltered versions, and it's there too. So obviously it's like, I thought it was like it seems like there's a lot less music in the dialogue scenes of the original movie, but it's not really true. There is a ton of music in the dialogue scenes.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's to J.J. Abrams' credit that he's saying like, oh, let's release this. This is probably, at least partly the fan in him saying like, wow, John Williams wrote all this great music. Like, let's put it out there, rather than, the approach of like, well, we're not using it in the movie, so there's no reason to put it out. And it's also, and that's also, it's probably, I'm sure it's partly a marketing thing too, where you have albums now. I don't know about other, I just know this phenomenon with like rap albums. But it may be true of others where, to the extent that people are releasing physical media anymore for music. So maybe this was more true like 10 years ago or 5 years ago, but there would be an album put out, but then there would be like a version that was only sold in Target, and that had, an extra track or two that wasn't on any of the other versions. And then there would be a version that was only sold in Walmart, and that version would have, a track or two that wasn't found anywhere else. And there would be a Best Buy version, and that would have slightly different bonus tracks that weren't available on any of the others. And so that's kind of, honestly, it's a marketing ploy to get people to buy either multiple versions of the album or to go online and purchase all of those different bonus tracks and end up paying a little bit more than they would have just buying them all as one album.
Yeah, that's kind of why I have not pre-ordered the score yet, because one, because I'm a subscriber to Apple Music, and unless I hear differently, there's a pretty good chance that it'll appear on iTunes.
Yeah, I did pre-order it in part, and or at least I should say that was before I knew that they were going to be releasing this extra music. But I'm still comfortable with having pre-ordered because I kind of would want to hear both. I would want to hear, okay, here is the soundtrack that that John Williams put together in sequence that he thought was sort of the best representation of this movie, and then I also want to hear this other stuff, but I want to be able to hear both iterations of those two things, and so right, I'm buying into this idea that I want to hear as much of this as possible, but in different ways.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. It's like when Attack of the Clones came out, they offered a version at Target that had a bonus track, and it's something to do with the droid foundries of Geonosis. There was some extra music there, and it's like, well, and then I ended up buying, like, because I worked in a record store, somebody had brought in a promo copy of the soundtrack before it came out, and then it's like, oh, I'll have to have this too. Of course, to this day, it's still sealed. I've never opened it because I only ever played the Target one. But yeah, I know it's like, well, do I want to buy it on vinyl? Do I want to buy it as a digital download? Do I want to buy it as a CD? When I'm like, how often do I actually listen to the CDs that I buy now? But then again, it's like it's easier to listen to a CD than a record for me because my record player's in the basement and I got to turn on the amplifier, and it's going to be a double record, I'm sure, and double records would probably be like $50 or something.
Yeah.
So, and who knows? Like I said, it's the whole. If it was recorded digitally, what's the point in getting it on vinyl anyway? But
yeah,
I am looking.
So there's other one, I guess. Quick thing before we wrap up about The Force Awakens, and we'll just make this episode just all about The Force Awakens.
Yeah.
To go back to the trailers, there's one shot that a lot of people have been talking about, and that's, I guess, Finn with a lightsaber fighting a First Order stormtrooper, and the stormtrooper appears to have some kind of weapon that can block a lightsaber without being cut in two. And I guess I should have told people who don't want to know that this was a spoiler. But,
it's in the ad. It's on TV.
It's in, yeah. This probably, even if this is the first time you've heard about it, this won't be the last time.
Is that the dude? Do you think it's the dude from the Raid?
I thought those guys were going to be on Jakku and some of the gangs on Jakku rather than being stormtroopers, but it could be. I thought it was interesting because both the idea and then even the look of it remind me of the old Shaw Brothers movie, The One-Armed Swordsman, which it's a martial arts movie, and if even if you haven't ever seen that movie or old Hong Kong martial arts movies, just picture in your mind what you think a 1960s, 1970s Hong Kong martial arts movie looks like. And One-Armed Swordsman helped create that formula, essentially. It was one of the first Shaw Brothers movies. Well, I don't think it was one of the first Shaw Brothers movies, but it was one of the first movies that set forth a kind of formula and a pattern and a framework that a lot of both that same director and some other directors and who worked in that Shaw Brothers studio kind of ran with. So the idea behind the One-Armed Swordsman is that there's this guy whose father worked for a famous martial arts teacher. He was like a servant. He was like a butler or something. That family, that clan, got attacked in the night, and the father, the butler, gave his life to protect the head of this clan. So fast forward, I don't know, 15, 20 years later, and the son is there, and he is a very promising student. But the head of the clan has a daughter who's very kind of arrogant and petulant and kind of mocks the main character a little bit, and kind of makes up something that the guy said and says that the main character insulted her, and so they have to have a duel, but he doesn't want to fight her, and so she ends up actually cutting off one of his arms, and he kind of runs off into the snow, but then he has to come back and rescue that clan because a competing clan has. So this clan, they're called, it's like the Golden Sword or something like that. They have like a specially made sword that's very powerful. And so a competing clan has come up with a weapon that is designed solely to stop that sword. And it's basically a clamp where, you swing the sword and it goes in the clamp, and there's a catch, and I'm not describing this very well because it's very visual.
I'm getting it.
It's hard to describe. So it kind of clamps down on the sword so that they can't move it. And so you have that in one hand, and in the other hand you take a dagger or a knife and you stab the guy with it. And so that's how you kill the like golden sword clan people. And so, they've come up with this weapon that can stop the sword. And so then it takes the one-armed swordsman and his like broken sword to fight against the competing clan. And so again, it reminded me of that story. And so I'd be curious to know whether that helped inspire it, because the look of the weapon that the stormtroopers have actually does kind of look like a little bit the clamp that this competing clan has.
Yeah, it looks very functional in a way that
it's kind of like a double barreled at the end of it. But it's made of that same kind of like white and black plastic that their uniforms are.
Right. Like they had these things like, is this something they come up against a lot or something?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, it's the sword lock is what it's called.
I mean, it doesn't look anything like the staffs that the Magna Guards from Revenge of the Sith have. General Grievous's guards, they had those like plasma Q-tips or whatever they call them.
Right, and that's the thing is that this idea of weapons that can block lightsabers without getting cut in half, like that's sort of been around in the Star Wars galaxy for a while.
Yeah, it's the idea that
kind of went away from them because there weren't any Jedi anymore, so they didn't need them.
I like this because I was talking about this the other night because we were watching, which we'll talk about next week, the Rebels. Mm-hmm. And just a quick thing is that they bring in this subplot about this interdictor cruiser, which is it's a Star Destroyer that produces some effect.
It's a gravity well generator.
Yeah, you can yank.
It pulls ships out of light speed or of hyperspace, or it prevents them from jumping to hyperspace.
And it was kind of like I don't know if it was invented if it was a role playing game thing before, or Timothy Zahn created it for that first Heir to the Empire trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
It feels heartening because it's almost like a doff of the cap to EU people, because they're thinking like that was one of the plot points of this, like, well, how do you stop somebody who can just fly off to hyperspace? Well, you can only have their hyperdrive break so many times. Mm-hmm. So we create this device that'll yank them out of thing, and then how do you solve that problem? And that's the Isla Miri, which were the creatures that supposedly block the Force, which I was always a little like, I liked the effect that it had, because then Luke wouldn't be super powered and all the time. But it's the idea, like, how do you stop a Jedi? If they're all powerful, like they're pretty all powerful for most of the prequel, and then they start to, by the beginning of or the midpoint or whatever of Revenge of the Sith, they've actually started figuring out how to like deal with Jedi. Like Jedi, they're just another warrior, and it's like it kind of I like it because it kind of depowers the Jedi a little bit. I mean, that was the whole fun. Mm-hmm. That was the whole fun thing about the original trilogy, that the Jedi were more like, they were almost like crusty old knights at this point. It's like they've forgotten how to do half of their stuff. All the people that were there are dead, and they're Luke's just trying to figure out, like, well, this is how I do it, and I'll make a lightsaber, and I'm just kind of doing the best I can, and I kind of like that, because then it's that idea of how quickly they establish in the prequels that Jedi's, it's
right. Jedis can like practically fly, and they're flipping around all over the place, and they
Yeah, and I think this is kind of fun, especially if it's a nod to this one-armed swordsman thing, because that's pretty obscure, at least in my view. But I'm not well versed in Shaw Brothers movies at all. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of, and I like the design of it. The only thing I would say is that at first I was like, well, geez, Finn's really good with this lightsaber, even though you only see one slash or whatever. Then I realized if he's a stormtrooper, he's not some guy that was like, working in a restaurant. I mean, he's a trained soldier.
Right. And one of the other implications of this new sequel trilogy is that the First Order stormtroopers were maybe trained a little better than the stormtroopers of the original trilogy, or at least, they want to make them seem more fearsome. And some of the new canon, right, Rebels is hitting this theme hard that, like, the stormtroopers aren't nearly a match for the clone troopers, where the clone troopers were bred to, be fierce fighters, whereas the stormtroopers are kind of silly and not quite as effective and just not as fearsome. And so I think they're trying to establish now that the First Order troopers, like, those are more fearsome. Those are, actually, something to worry about rather than just,
they're not going to bonk their heads, and they're not going to, they're a better shot. Mm-hmm. I mean, they got flamethrowers, for criminy sakes. I mean, imagine if they'd had flamethrowers in Endor and they just start setting the Ewoks' houses on fire. It's like, why didn't we think about this 30 years ago? We wouldn't be in this predicament.
Right.
But it's good because it's a forward thing. It's not like, R2-D2 having jetpacks and a, ice dispenser and a, hand lotion dispenser or something. And all of a sudden, like, why didn't he have all these things in the original trilogy? Right. Oh, they broke. Yeah. That's what George said. He's like, why don't they have those? Oh, his warranty had run out. I'm like, come on. Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and the interdictors, just to clean up there, the interdictors they make their first appearance in Heir to the Empire, the first Zahn book, but then they've also, in this new canon era, they showed up in the Tarkin novel, and then also Heir to the Jedi.
Okay.
So Rebels wasn't the first instance of bringing those into this new era, but it was the first time we've seen them visually, at least in this new kind of canon. So yeah, and I guess we'll talk about Rebels a little bit. I also kind of like seeing, I like seeing those as well. It was sort of a similar idea to them bringing the B-Wing, and you can sort of breathe a little easier or relax. Like, okay, so they're not, right, they're building the way that they're building up, or they're getting from the prequel era to the original trilogy era, right? They're kind of doing it in a logical way. They're not saying it was like a complete overhaul of all of the ships and everything. They're saying, okay, well, they're developing this new interdictor, or here's a prototype of a B-Wing, and that's, how you finally get it later on, right? They're just kind of putting these things in place here and there, which, I mean, all right, well, let's just talk about Rebels. So we found out that they were going to be renewed for a third season, which I'm glad about, because apparently the season 2 finale is only in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
Which seems quick to me. Maybe where I read that, maybe they were mistaken, but I feel like there hasn't been a lot that's actually happened this season.
No.
We've gotten kind of more background on different characters, and like I said, okay, now we know where the B-Wing comes from, and now we see this interdictor, and okay, the clone troopers are still around. Like, we've learned stuff about the galaxy, the environment, and there's been a lot of world building done this season, but in the first season, there was kind of this clear thread through the whole season, and you could sort of see where it was heading, that it was building to this climax. And that is less clear to me with season 2.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure what they're building towards with all of these last batch of episodes.
Yeah, it's like they started out so strong at the beginning of the season, and the summer movie, and I was like, okay, maybe, because at first I was very dismissive about season 1. It was very greasy kid stuff. It was the Star Wars universe how old is Ezra supposed to be? Is he 15?
Early to mid-teens?
Yeah, and it was
maybe 14, 15, probably.
And it was a very greasy kid stuff, and I got turned off very fast, and then they kind of started bringing it back into a more...
Yeah. I'm so glad that they've laid off the Ezra has a crush on Sabine thing. Like, I'm so glad that they went away from that, because it was too much in season 1.
Exactly. And then they kind of got away from it, and now they're obviously not going that bad, but it does feel like they took like 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And it was kind of like we were there was a lot of groaning when we watched the dialogue of this last episode, and it was like, ugh.
Yeah.
It's like, I
wasn't crazy about it.
Yeah, I wasn't, but I mean, I guess we can go on an actual more in-depth thing next week or something.
Yeah.
But it was...
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. No, it's just, I didn't make notes of it when I watched it, but it was just, I don't know. It's just, for some reason, some of the stuff just, I have to remember, I watch it on the Disney XD app, and all of a sudden there's these jarring commercials starring very energetic children.
Coming up next, Dog with a Blog.
Yeah, and it's just like, it's like jarring. And I always forget, and it kind of keeps reminding me, like, this is actually for kids. But then Lucasfilm is trying to say, hey, if you want to get the full Star Wars experience, you really need to reach out and play this game. You need to watch this show.
They're trying to make it for a cross-generation.
And since I have a Star Wars podcast, it's under my purview to watch this. But then I also feel a little bit like it's gotten a little bit more kiddish.
Well, and all of the other Star Wars-centric blogs and outlets who report on the movie are also covering this show, and so it certainly doesn't necessarily feel like it's just, it's not just for kids. It's a part of the larger fabric of Star Wars. So it's like, if you like Star Wars, you need to be paying attention to the show. But yeah, I think dialogue and dialogue-wise, certainly this past episode was a little more kind of cliched.
Well, it's a retelling of...
And just sort of like, all right, we just need to get to the end point, and just whatever, something happens, blah, blah, blah.
It's kind of almost like a retelling of the middle third of Star Wars.
Yeah.
It's kind of like their way of doing that.
Yeah, there were a lot of echoes to A New Hope.
Yeah, and there's this kind of... And I always find it a little strange when you have a show that's supposedly for kids. Because I'm always having this problem on a personal level, and I could probably interject this really quickly. Maybe the listeners, if you've toughed it out, it's the idea of like what's suitable for kids. And on the show, it's like, he shoots. There's a thing where Ezra escapes from confinement on this interdictor cruiser, and around the corner, Kanan and Rex show up in costume, and his first reaction is he shoots him. Well, he shoots him with a stun, and it's very comical, and it's very funny. And then, Rex says something like, oh, you should have had it on kill, because you never know who is coming. And then they, so it's kind of, it's a kid's show because, okay, well, they were knocked silly. Well, then like 2 seconds later, they're literally shooting people to death with laser guns. And it's this kind of thing where it's like, well, this is like a 12, 14-year-old kid killing people,
right?
And it's like, this is it's like, isn't this a little too violent for Star Wars? I mean, I'm all right with it because I'm a grown up, but then if I had a 9-year-old kid watching this, maybe I'd be a little like, are they ready for Star Wars kind of thing? And it's
right.
I guess, and my point of bringing a personal is like, I grabbed one of those at the Y. I have like those giving trees, and you grab like a card, and it says I'm a boy 14 and I want a game for my Xbox 360. And I'm in this kind of quandary because I want to get this guy something cool because 14, but like every video game is rated M. All the good games are rated M, and they say that that's for 17 and older. And it's like, well, I have a copy of Fallout 3 that I could give him. It's got all this great stuff on it, but it says rated M. And it's like, well, is this do I buck the trend and I throw this M-rated game and hope that they don't notice, or am I gonna am I creating the next Columbine, kid by giving him violent video games? And I guess that's not having kids. I always have this trouble where I'm watching media and I go, is this too much for kids watching Disney XD, presumably unsupervised? Because they're like, oh, it's there's no context where they're like, when I was a kid, it was like, my mom, always the pragmatic person in the family, I'd be watching, Raiders of the Lost Ark and like, those great sounds of Harrison Ford punching some guy and that sounds of like two steaks slapping together. And my mom would just go, if this was real life, his hand would be broken. Like, Mom! But she's right. Every time when I finally got older and I actually got in a fight, I was like, the next day, I'm like, my hand hurts. No one told me that my hand was going to hurt. And yes, my mom's like, yes, I did.
Yeah.
And I think Rebels is it has that thing where it's like, it's grown up stories, but then sometimes they backtrack, but then they're still in that idiom of, grown up. I mean, we never even addressed, because we talked about this before, that The Force Awakens is a PG-13 movie.
Yeah.
That we had a whole conversation. They're like, oh, they're going to get a pass. It's, blah, blah, blah. It's Star Wars. They wouldn't be shooting for a PG-13. But I guess we were wrong about that. And it's not a thing where we haven't heard any tales of them fighting the MPAA.
I mean, the other piece of that is that, right, so episode 3 was PG-13.
Right.
But, when the original trilogy was put out, when that came out, they didn't have a PG-13 rating. And so a lot of people are saying, well, if that had been around and during the original trilogy, then Empire probably, or might have gotten a PG-13 rating. And so I think, the people who make Star Wars and the older folks who consume Star Wars are just like, yeah, whatever, it's Star Wars. Like, there's going to be violence, but it's going to be within certain limits, and it's not going to be too extreme. There's not going to be any nudity. The cursing is going to be, like science fiction cursing where they either invent words or they just say like damn a couple times. They're like, oh, it's Star Wars. It's harmless. It's not going to be, even though it's PG-13, like I'll take my 10-year-old. It's fine. And maybe that's fine. The whole movie rating system, which we've talked about already, so I don't want to repeat myself too much, but there's a question of the extent to which it's actually effective or actually means anything anymore.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I guess the parents are the ultimate authority, and I guess we should feel good about that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I would be kind of weird if they were checking, asking for school IDs as kids were going to the movie. Are you 13? You know this is a PG-13 movie. I mean,
yeah.
I think the worst we're going to see is maybe some light blaster burns and light dismemberment.
Right.
Like any Star Wars.
But at the same time, we've seen in the ads, the burning of that village, like that could get intense.
Yeah.
And if I had to guess for why the movie's PG-13, that's where I would start. So there might be kids who are 9. I mean, I guess PG-13 just means, right, like if you're under 13, you need a parent to go with you. But, there might be some kids who may be too young for this movie or who, maybe it's not age, it's maturity, or it's just sensitivity to those kinds of like intense visuals, and we don't know what the sound's going to be like, and dialogue. Maybe there are some kids who are genuinely creeped out by Kylo Ren's voice, and that it's going to be too intense for them.
Yeah, I mean that's the
thing. So like you said, it's just the parents just have to know their kids and know what's going to be appropriate.
Yeah, I think on that, we can comfortably wrap up.
Yeah.
Guess what? If you're a parent and you have opinions about the appropriateness of kids in Star Wars, you can let us know, because we have email at talkingbirdcast@gmail.com. You can tweet at us at talkingbirdcast. You can like us on Facebook, facebook.com/talkingbird-podcast. We are on Tumblr at talkingbirdStarWars.tumblr.com. And I say that every week, and I would love if you're a listener to just kind of at least reach out in this next few weeks and drop us an email or something. Just let us know what.
Are you nervous about the movie? Are you excited? Is there something?
Yeah, I'm curious. I'm really
a particular
curious.
Feel that you have.
Yeah, it's like, what are you hopeful about? What are you not hopeful about? Are you Are you in a no spoiler mode now, where you don't even watch commercials? You're staying off the news sites. Are you fully spoiled? Is that a thing that you're into now? It's like, I'd kind of like to know. I mean, even if you have some stuff like you feel like, geez, I come every week and I wish that they would talk about X. And I would I'd be curious to hear what you guys are wanting us to talk about, because we literally have 2 more episodes before, before the movie. And unfortunately, we're kind of going to be in this thing where we're kind of have to go dark for a little bit.
Yep. I'm going to be out of town.
He's going to be out of town. I'm going to be, whatever. I'm going to probably try to keep my comments off the web.
Yeah. We're going to view it as an opportunity to, everyone take some time, process the movie, rather than, I'm sure there are going to be some folks who want to give their immediate reactions and, do I'm not totally sure what a periscope is, but who might, periscope their reaction from the theater right after seeing the movie, and that's fine. There's value in that, but for us, we're gonna take some time to process our thoughts about The Force Awakens before we come back and talk about it here.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, my first thought when it was like, oh man, no, I want to do a show like right after. I want to do it like that, and then I think, for a guy like me who talks way too much, maybe having a couple days to like let it marinate in my brain, it would probably be more entertaining for the listener than to hear me with my half crocked, half cooked jackass observations that I have to walk back the next week and be like, oh well, I know I said that, but I'm already scheduled to see it 3 times in 4 days. Not really by design. It's just they were like I think I said last week. They are actually a small independent theater in my neighborhood is actually going to be showing it a day early, because I think I don't know if it's digital projection or they made some kind of arrangement or whatever. I don't know why. I'm half expecting to show up and have them go, oh yeah, we got that date wrong. It's actually the 18th. Because it's a really small theater kind of situation.
Oh, we thought we could show it today, but we just got a phone call and they told us we can't.
Right. And that's kind of more and more how things go now with these. I've heard some things about, how movies are, because they're all digital now, about, there was some thing on Reddit about a guy who worked for a theater chain, talking about Lionsgate that controlled the Hunger Games series, and about how they almost gave the technicians like 20 minutes to calibrate. They usually do a test run to calibrate your thing, make sure your everything is set up right, and they basically gave these guys 20 minutes or something to set up the movie before its first showing, and it had like a midnight showing, and then they'd actually lock it down for 12 hours. So if there was a problem, they wouldn't actually be able to fix it till right before the second showing of the film again. So I don't really know what my point of this is just, hey, drop us a line. Let us know what you want us to talk about. I think that's all. I want to thank you for listening and for talking Birdcast. I have been Robert Zachary.
I remain John Llewellyn.
May the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you.